Welcome to the Freeman's Podcast. I'm your host, Joel Whitmire. Join us as we explore liberty, truth, and current events from a biblical worldview. All right, well, welcome back, Cam. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, Joel.
Good.
I'm a little tired.
A little tired?
Voice is getting a little scratchy.
Yeah.
We're going on like hour 3 of recording this.
Hey, we are really trucking along here. So I appreciate you sticking with us. And for our listeners, yeah, we did this all in one sitting. We literally just kept going through. And yeah, you need some water?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I'll push through. It's my pietas. It's my duty to this podcast.
There you go.
Push through.
Pietas from that
if you don't
last
know what
episode.
that means, watch the last
Yes,
episode.
watch number 2.
It was really good, really fun. I'm enjoying this conversation. I think
yeah.
it's a good thing that it's going to be an hour longer than we thought it was.
I feel like this is like your moment. Like this is the episode you've been like on your seat waiting for since we started.
I have. This is my moment. I'd like to thank my mom and all the people that have brought me this far.
Don't forget your wife.
And my wife.
That's twice now. First episode, now this one.
It's so bad. I'm gonna tell her not to watch these.
Oh, she's going to.
Unintentionally being a bad husband is like the mantra of my world. So good stuff, people.
Okay, so
recap
real quick. We talked in the last episode about the Roman religion, how it worked. We got into a lot of Christianity,
sure,
and how. Because I know that's not quite the Republic, but the same kind of system was in place from the Republic to the Empire, and how Christians were involved with that.
Yep.
And then we talked about the Roman values or the Roman virtues, at least 4 of them. So I'm going to try to say their Latin names,
okay,
which is going to be funny, and then I'm going to say the English version. So,
okay.
Pietas, which means duty. Then dignitas.
Yeah.
So that's where we get
Bingo.
dignity. And nope, not even going to try
Potestas.
Potestas,
Yeah.
which is power. And then libertas, which is my favorite, and that is liberty or freedom. Yep. So we talked about those. We highly recommend you go back and listen and watch those episodes. They were a lot of fun to discuss. Got a little spicy there a couple times, but it was good stuff.
Yeah.
And
Fun conversation, man.
So the next episode here, we are going to get into, again, kind of gave a little sneak peek in the last episode, but how the Roman Republic became the empire.
Yes. Can I hit us with an icebreaker question that I just thought of?
Yeah, please. Because I had nothing.
Yeah. Like, if you made it this far, no more icebreakers.
Right,
no.
right.
What's your favorite fictional empire?
Oh my gosh. Fictional empire?
No. Reframe the question. Which fictional empire would you most like to live under their rule?
Oh gosh. Considering every fictional empire they're using the word empire to show it's evil.
It's bad. Yeah.
So, see, live under their rule doesn't mean I don't join the resistance. So, I don't know, the Star Wars empire maybe. But also, I'd have to check, and this is a little bit on the, not a lot of people will necessarily know about this, but is the Fire Nation from The Last Airbender considered an empire?
They're definitely pretty imperialistic in the Last Airbender.
I don't know why, but that's the first thing that came to mind, and I was like,
Fire
okay,
Nation.
that actually might be fun.
That would be super cool.
Yeah.
We recently have been watching through parts of The Legend of Korra, which I don't really like The Legend of Korra.
I like the first season
very
and
boring.
stopped watching it.
The Avatar: The Last Airbender is freaking awesome.
Yep.
That show is so good. It's like very old now, but I highly recommend anybody watching The Last Airbender.
It's got such great humor. It's got a really compelling story.
Yep.
I don't like everything in it. I'm obviously not a fan of mysticism and stuff, and there's some of that, and I don't like it, but it's got a good story. Yeah.
But it's cool because we were watching The Legend of Korra, and Zuko's grandson, Iroh, who he's named after his like great uncle or great great uncle.
Right.
Uncle Iroh is the best character in the whole show. But
he likes his tea.
Yes. Uncle Iroh.
Yes.
But so Iroh, the grandson, is like the general of the Fire Nation or whatever in the Legend of Korra.
Yes, I remember that.
As soon as you said that, I was like, I would love to live in the Fire Nation when Iroh was in charge.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
Like, that'd be dope.
Yeah, or after
the
Fire King Emperor. I don't remember.
What, like Fire Lord?
The Fire Lord. After he gets defeated and everything kind of goes back to peaceful. That would have been a good time too.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's
a good shout, Joel.
Yeah,
that was literally off the top of his dome. Well done.
Yeah, I don't usually think about that show because I just haven't seen it in a long time. Yeah. But it was like that came to mind. I was like, that actually would be pretty cool. So, anyways,
that's awesome. I love it.
So, Cam, how did the Roman Republic become an empire?
Oh God.
Short answer, no. Doesn't have to be short. But anyways.
Yeah, so I put that question in the outline, but it's like, that's one of those questions that like historians would like freak out over.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, that's too simplified of a question.
Sure.
You know? Because I mean, it's like literally like libraries of books have been written about how Rome became an empire.
Well, you've got an hour.
I've got an hour. All right, let's go. So you have the Republic. You have what seemingly is a relatively stable society for all things considered. We talked about in one of the previous episodes how there's some semblance of checks and balances and order within the society. There's, Rome is on military conquest quite often.
Right.
Into the latter years of the Republic, they're, conquering lands like Greece. They end up taking basically all of Greece. Annexing it and kind of bringing it into the fold of their empire. So it's like, what would cause such a seemingly from the outside drastic shift in the order of things? Drastic shift in like, if everything's going so well, why does Rome become an empire in the first place?
Right.
And this is sort of my 1,000-foot view take on one of the largest factors that leads to Rome becoming an empire, but it's just one, and that is political violence.
Okay.
So one of the largest, biggest, most prominent things, consistent things that begins to happen, as we'll see around 121 BC, is the normalization of political violence within the Roman Republic system.
Wow, it became
normalized.
That's crazy.
Yes. But it didn't start out as normal.
Sure.
So we'll get into this because it'll all make sense kind of as I talk about some of these case studies. So I have here, there's two gentlemen called the Gracchi brothers.
Yep.
And the oldest was born in 163 BC. He dies, or the youngest one dies in 121 BC, if I've got my dates right. Essentially, they were two Roman politicians that become, if I'm remembering the trajectory of their political career, they actually become the plebeian tribune first and then work their way into the Senate, which is a part of this process, which is what starts to happen as Rome is going on conquest. They're fighting wars. Eventually, you have certain families, some of the patrician families end up dying off because you have the youngest sons dying on conquest and they're not able to continue some of these lines.
Right.
So what they have to eventually do is open the door to what they consider some of the best and brightest of the plebeian families to be allowed into the political fold because they simply don't have enough people to keep that system going.
Right.
And if I'm remembering my history correctly, the Gracchi brothers sort of fall into this line of history. What they do is they advocate for a set of political reforms that are geared toward agricultural and social reforms, something along the lines of what you might consider to be like welfare state ideas. A lot of what they center around is protecting the rights of like homeless veterans, the alleviation of debt,
not quite the welfare state.
It's not, but the way that they're perceived by the like sort of traditional class of patricians is they are. I know this like literally a million words that I'm trying to remember.
No, it's all good. You're doing fantastic. Keep going.
And this is actually where the word comes from, but they are called demagogues.
Yeah.
And so what it is how they're perceived is that they're just pandering to the plebeians' demands for these economic reforms.
They're populist.
They're populist. That's how they're perceived. Tension builds up around these issues. As it would. So much so that it boils over with the political murder of the oldest Gracchi brother by the Roman Senate.
Wow.
So they actually take him out. The story kind of goes that they kill him and they spill his blood into the Tiber River. And wow, this is considered unprecedented in the Roman history of Rome, because you have the expulsion of the kings. That's military combat, right? Like they earn their freedom by defeating the Etruscans supposedly honorably, right? They defeat them in combat, they expulse them, they say, we don't want you to rule us anymore. This is the first instance where you have literally senators killing senators simply because they're afraid of what their sort of pandering to the people might bring.
Gotcha.
Then you have, a few years later, the younger Gracchi brother ends up in the same boat. He's getting into these, hot waters with these older classes of patricians. He ends up being bludgeoned to death, if I remember correctly, within the forum itself.
Oh, wow.
So, which is another sort of escalation, because before it was we took this guy out, we executed him ourselves, and now it's we've literally killed this guy in the Roman Senate, right? So you can see sort of the beginning of this progression of this problem is elevating over time, all over these sort of populist ideas. So that is, in my opinion, my argument, and that's not just me. This Roman historians have said that moment in Roman history where political violence enters into the fold begins this trajectory over the next 150 years or so of history.
Yeah, because that's coming down close to, we're getting closer to that BC time.
We are.
Which is amazing to me. Just a little side note. At the time of the shift between the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire is right at that same epoch of period that Christ comes.
Yep.
I think that's amazing.
It is. It's really fascinating because you have Gaius Julius Caesar, the first Caesar, is actually born in 100 BC.
Wow.
So it's really easy to remember.
Yeah. That is easy. I'll remember that probably from now on.
Exactly. And like you said, it's just fascinating the way that these sort of all of these historical components align with the coming of Christ. And it's divine providence.
Yeah.
There's other historians of Christianity who have made very convincing arguments about just the simple technological reasons why God may have chosen that time, because of the beginning, the normalcy of writing that begins to happen, right? The ability to write letters to get the gospels out.
And the Greek language takes over the entire world, which is arguably the most precise language that we've come across, which is amazing because Christianity gets introduced to the world in Greek, which is the most precise. And I think there's no coincidence there. God is you're going to be able to know what I mean when I'm telling you who Christ is and what's going on.
Right. And it's, it not only is precise, but it becomes, again, we're getting on a tangent here, but Koine Greek is, begins to be spoken by common people.
Yes.
Right. So although most people couldn't read and write, you could read the Gospels to someone in Koine Greek. They could understand it in their own language. And that's very powerful in the spreading of the gospel.
So
back to Rome.
Back to Rome, back to the becoming an empire. The last thing I think you said about that was that this political violence is often seen by historians as the kicking off point of the beginning of the end.
Yes. Yep. And again, there's other factors, right? Like some historians talk about the institutional failures that the Gracchi brothers are pointing out as part of it, but you can't ignore the fact that this political violence opens up. It's literally, it's like,
and not or.
Yeah, exactly. It's, it's kind of like pun intended, but sort of the opening of Pandora's box. Like once you open the lid, it's like you can't close it with the political violence.
Yep.
So that's the Gracchi brothers.
Okay.
Moving along.
Yep.
Around, say, 40 years later, you have two individuals, which they come onto the scene earlier than 40 years later, but where what we're about to talk about comes to a head is around 80 BC.
Okay.
But there's two other individuals, Marius and Sulla.
Yep.
They're two extremely famous Roman senators, then generals, then consuls. These guys are famous for a number of reasons, and we don't have time to get into the long sort of narrative of their whole relationship and what happens, but they become rivals with each other. These are the first Roman consuls to start serving like several consecutive terms as consul.
Gotcha.
There was kind of common practice is that you would serve and then you might step away, and then you might be reelected. But there's just sort of like this kind of like general practice is that like you don't want to overstay your welcome.
Just kind of like that goes back to the dignitas of this is just the social decorum. Like this is the social norm. Step away, but they don't.
They don't. Right. And not, they're reelected, right? So the people are putting them into these positions. It's just sort of like you see this break that happens where politicians are starting to become more sort of like, I don't know what the right word would be, but they're starting to be held in like a higher regard.
Okay, sure.
Sort of like maybe the way of looking at it is like a cult of personality starts to form around these individuals.
They become celebrities. Yeah.
Yep. So, and really what a lot of this has to do with is that they're both generals.
Okay.
And there's a shift that happens, we believe, around this time with Marius because he's one of the most successful generals in Roman history.
Okay.
And there becomes a pledge that is invented, supposedly it's a military reform around this time, where he starts asking his soldiers, they do sort of like a pledge when they join the army, and they pledge allegiance to Marius.
Okay, wow.
Not to the Republic.
Gotcha.
Very important distinction.
Yeah, huge.
This carries on into the Imperial Age. So we actually have, I should have, and truth be told, do you care if I look something up real quick?
No, I don't care.
I know this is like super random, but I want to try and look up something.
Yeah, you're good. Just as you are doing that, I just to prepare our listeners in a minute here, we're going to get into a bit of a compare and contrast. Like we did in the first episode, we compared and contrast what the founders did and what they were trying to do in building a new, I'd say a new type of republic, because they didn't want to rebuild what the Romans did and the Greeks did because those failed so miserably. So what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to compare and contrast we're going to look at all these things that the Roman Republic became an empire. We're going to look at where we are today. And the purpose of doing this is we want to be aware of where we're at, and not that history has to repeat itself. It doesn't have to repeat itself. But if we're not careful, it can repeat itself. So let's look at where we're at. We'll probably see a lot of similarities. And let's start being cautious about it. And not just cautious, we can start taking steps, peaceful, legal, constitutional steps to avoid falling into the same pitfalls that those who came before, like the Romans and the Republic.
Yeah.
Did you find it?
No.
Awesome.
So I apologize. I know that was a random sort of break-in thing, but I was going to pull up one of these military oaths because I do have access to it, but I wasn't able to. So
you're good.
That's my apologies for that random break. But I'll summarize what I was going to pull up is we have the surviving documents from when Caesar Augustus ruled, where these soldiers would make these pledges to Augustus. So not in our military, you pledge to the Constitution. So when you join like the army, you say like, I vow to uphold the Constitution and the values that it stands for.
Right.
Or let's say you're joining the Secret Service, you pledge like your, undying devotion to the seat of the presidency.
Okay.
So you're like, I will lay my life down for the seat of the presidency,
for the
not
office,
the president.
For the office, right.
Exactly.
Right.
Inspiration for that in our society comes from not wanting to be like the Romans.
Yes.
Because the soldiers in ancient Rome, they're pledging allegiance to a specific person.
Yep.
And so much so that they go into the fact that they say that I pledge my undying loyalty to defend X person and for their interest and against those who may be deemed, who I may see as their enemies.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Man. That is insane. Yeah. No wonder things fell apart.
Yep. So this is another sort of one of these steps that reform under Marius creates this loyalty, these cult of personalities around these specific generals.
Yeah.
Where you now have this new thing where you don't have as much pietas towards the Republic, but you have specific generals that people are pledging themselves to.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. We good so far? Doing the recap, or should I keep going?
It's good. Yeah, so Marius does that in Sulla. I think you had mentioned, or they start having a rivalry of some sort.
Yes. So Marius represents a group of politicians that are common known as the populares.
Okay.
Sulla represents a group called the optimates. These terms are created. Well, these terms are created by the optimates because populares means for the people.
Yep.
Populist.
Yep.
Optimates means the best.
the Optimus. Yeah. The ultimate.
The optimal senators.
There you go. There's where that word is.
Yeah. So.
Wow.
Yeah. And really what you have is this sort of old guard versus new guard within Roman Republic politics, where it goes back to the same idea with the Gracchi brothers. So you have these new politicians who are being brought into the fold, who are seen as sort of pandering to the public.
Yeah.
What do they want? That's what Marius seems to be doing.
Right.
Sulla sort of represents this old guard of like wanting to keep that division between the patricians and the plebeians, and sort of standing up for like what would be considered like classical Roman values.
Gotcha. And Sulla isn't having people pledge to him.
That's a good question. I think he is. We're going to get into what he does instead, which is probably worse than that.
Gotcha.
So,
The only reason I asked that is because you said Sulla was going for the old values, old virtues, and one of them was to be pietas.
Yeah.
Man, I cannot say these words.
Okay.
Which the duty to the Republic. So I was just trying to see if he was a hypocrite.
Yeah.
And upholding that, or if he just is like, no, I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I need people to support me.
Yeah. So that's a fascinating question specifically about the military side of things, because I wouldn't know the answer off the top of my head if he has those same pledges. But we'll get into what he does. The discussion, what you said about him being a hypocrite, is a very fascinating question.
Wow.
Because it's that's part of what people debate about him quite often, is his
interesting
take on things. So this rivalry between the two of them boils over. Eventually what you have is the camp of Marius. So Marius has actually died at this point, but his sort of camp of people still exists within the Senate.
His political party?
Yeah, his political party.
Yeah. Guys, y'all listening?
Yeah. So Sulla effectively sees this as like an actual threat to the political system. Declares himself dictator in 80 BC.
Darn. Yeah, went a little further.
Yep. By, sort of not full approval, but there's a group of senators who fully back him in his decision to become dictator. And that's actually part of this divide, is that you have, like, it's the first time you have a debate over that power of dictator, where some of the Senate is saying, like, yes, we should give it to someone, and some is saying, no, we shouldn't.
Gotcha. Because usually, from just past episodes, the whole Senate would be like, we need a dictator to protect us.
Yeah. And so, it may have even been like super majority, but that's the idea. Is it's like the Senate and consensus says this is something that has to be done.
And this is the first time it's not. And he initiates it. Yeah. Sulla initiates it by saying, I'm going to be dictator. And then senators like, yeah, you can be dictator.
Yep. Him along with his constituents puts forward this idea. So he ends up becoming dictator one way or another, and takes it upon himself to begin cleansing the Republic of what he sees as these group of popularities. This problem.
So I would say, and it's okay, I'm not a historian, but I would say the Roman Republic has died.
I think that's a perfectly valid thing to say. So not all like Roman historians would say that, but like we've gotten to this point where like you have the Gracchi brothers, like 2 guys being killed by the Senate, and what we're about to see is an explosion of political violence. Yeah,
because you had mentioned like the normalization of it, and so keep going by all means. But I'm just like looking at this, like somebody's declaring himself dictator, and the Senate is going on with it. The systems that made the Republic have broken.
Right. They've become like arbitrary.
Right. And so now what was the Republic isn't there anymore. It's this hybrid thing that's going to turn into the Empire now. Yes. So we've shifted to something else besides a Republic.
I think that's a perfectly logical explanation for this, because a lot of the like blame is tend to put on like Julius Caesar and the Triumvirate, but it's like when you study this, you're like, it was already like broken. Yeah. Right. Like that would have never been possible if all of these things with Marius and Sulla hadn't happened. Right. So in 80 BC, Sulla starts instituting these things called prescription list. And what he literally does is they nail list of senators' names to like public spaces, like the Senate Forum, like all over the place, where it's lists of Roman senators that they are looking for, and if you inform upon them, they will literally go and hunt them down, kill them, and then their property is then put into the fold of the state, and oftentimes the informants are given a piece of their property.
Oh my gosh. This is insane.
So it's like, when it's not, I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say like all HE double hockey sticks breaks loose.
Thanks
you
for
like that? Yeah. The PG version.
Yeah, the PG version.
Hundreds of Roman politicians are being murdered.
Yeah, wow.
By order of like this dictator who's literally sending people out to look at them. And then, as we know from you study any history of informancy, as soon as you incentivize people informing on their fellow citizens, it starts happening. People whose names aren't even on the list start getting thrown into this.
Yep, that's what happened in the French Revolution. That's what happened with the Nazis. Yep. It's just pandemonium. Yep. It's chaos beyond imagination. It's evil.
Yep.
Because covetousness starts reigning. Thou shalt not covet.
Thou shalt not murder.
Thou shalt not murder. Yeah. Envy, all these things, and for the sake of taking what they have. Like, it's just nothing new under the sun, just a different name.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The name in this case is Sulla. But so where this sort of boils over, like the final tipping point of this, is there's actually a moment, which is one of the wildest moments, in my opinion, in like that I've ever read in history, is that Sulla actually gathers the entire Roman Senate, at least the senators who he views as a threat to the Republic, in the Colosseum, sets up an entire set of games to be had that they're going to go and watch and partake in, right? And at the beginning of the games, he has someone stand up and begin reading a prescription list of the names of all of the senators present in the Colosseum, and then has his men descend upon these senators and slaughters them in the Colosseum.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's pretty insane.
Yeah.
Good grief.
Yeah. So just one of the just like the optics of that. Like I remember reading that for the first time and just being like, that's wild.
Yeah.
That he literally makes like this theatrical spectacle of these citizens, of these senators
being
to
killed.
be like, yeah.
Yeah.
And for the public to see.
I wonder if there was cheering, honestly.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So then there's this thing is that Sulla, by many, is viewed as sort of a savior and reinstitutor of the old Roman Republic.
Because that's what he was going for all along.
Right. Now, you can argue about that because the only people that are left to comment on his methodology are the people who supported him. Are not on the proscription list. Right? And
history is written by the victor.
It is. But what is
not always
intriguing about Sulla, and I'll say clearly there's a lot of issues with his methodology and the violence that he chooses to use. But you talked about him being a hypocrite.
Mm-hmm.
Although many of the people who survive are people who are willing to sort of just say, yeah, like get along with whatever this guy says because I literally want to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Sulla also goes after some of his own people.
Okay.
And for reasons where he'll be like, you have been my friend for X amount of years, but in these ways you have like failed and perverted like your role as like a Roman politician. Therefore you die.
So he's
willing to break his own personal loyalties for this. He's not just sort of like going after these people he doesn't like. And it's literally he's being, non-discriminatory in who he's willing to put on.
So he's got a standard that he's actually abiding by, at least by all appearances.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
The second fascinating thing that I find about Sulla is that he's coming close to the end of his life. They think that he's probably has some type of disease or something like that, and knows that he's dying. He's named dictator for life.
Oh wow!
That's the role he's given by the remaining senators.
There's the hypocrisy for me.
So he relinquishes the role of dictator.
I need to shut up before. It's like the third time you've done that to me.
Yep.
Nice.
But so he gives it up willingly before he could have ruled for a few more years before he died. And so some historians have kind of looked at this and said obviously there's some dementedness in his methodology, but is this a man who actually genuinely believes that he's doing what is right?
Yeah, I mean,
because he believes at the end of it, he's like, I have restored order into the Republic is basically what he says. And so like Cincinnatus in his mind, I'm going to relinquish my power and go back to doing.
Well, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
I think the Republic was broken. Obviously, he thinks he's doing that, and he can have a line of reasoning that's wrong and be consistent with it. Have that standard, but it's still it broke the system. As you talked about, as we'll touch on in just a second, that caused the triumvirate to even come into existence. So,
yeah.
Nope.
Yeah.
It's
I think it's an intriguing thought. I think it's, it's like I said in one of the last episodes, people have all kinds of reasons for doing evil stuff.
Sure.
But it's it's fascinating to see this person where you're like, are they just a violent hypocrite, or are they like this person who is this really demented sense of duty and willingness to go to extreme lengths to do what they believe is right for their people? And I think it's wrong and messed up, but it's just sort of you have this very bizarre, complex figure in the history of the Roman Republic, in my opinion.
Right. So real quick, as we're going through this, how the Republic's becoming an empire, you had the political violence becomes normalized. Not right at first. You had the Gracchi brothers who were killed by the Senate. So the Senate's cleansing itself from these people who are trying to bring in reforms and for the benefit of the plebeians, the plebs. Okay, and then we go into a little while after that, about 50, 60 years or so. You have the political violence and civil war with Marius and Sulla. And then Marius dies off, but his party survives, and Sulla declares himself to be dictator for life. And then my argument is that that's where the republic breaks. That's where it dies.
Yep.
And then you get this weird hybrid thing that still kind of holds on to a picture of what it was, but it's already becoming the empire. And then Sulla, hypocrite, maybe not, but I'm going to lean on the side that he is a hypocrite and that he's just a power-hungry guy who maybe had a vision for what he wanted to be and maybe tried to do that, but it's still it just sounds like he wanted it his way. There was no room for reform. So I'm going to break my republic to save my republic, which is so dumb. You can't save something by killing it.
There you go. 100%.
So
I think that's a good way to put it.
That leads us to next part here.
Yes, I know. Again, this is a lot of history. So if anyone has stayed this long into these parts of this series, I commend you.
I think this is fascinating.
The whole history of the Roman Republic.
You're doing a fantastic job. If you guys want to drop a comment for Cam's encouragement here, he's done so much to prepare for this, and he's really been cranking it out. So thank you so much.
It's helpful for me, honestly, because like one day I'm going to teach classes on this stuff. So it's like getting used to like practicing
for sure,
explaining it is very helpful.
But so just move along. We're getting closer to the end of the absolute end of the Republic, and here's the Empire now. You've got it.
So, and I'll go over this a little bit, like less detailed in sort of the exact movements of things, because there's a lot. So the Triumvirate is made up of Gaius Julius Caesar, the one that everybody knows when they say Caesar. There's a guy, Pompey, or Pompey, that's how some people say it. I don't remember his first name, but he's just super famous, distinguished Roman general. And there's a guy named Crassus, who is like a Roman businessman, owns this like firefighting company that sets fire to people's houses and then offers to put it out for them for money.
I've heard of him.
But so they form this like political trio where they basically consolidate like all of power of the Roman like government. So I'm going to be very brief, broad strokes and like the historical movements, but just hit on some of these themes that are sort of exemplified. So Julius Caesar is actually friends with and belongs in the camp of the group of Marius supporters.
Okay.
He goes into exile and hiding when Sulla starts killing people.
Gotcha.
It's actually sort of this weird thing where there's someone like recognizes his like political astuteness for being such a young kid and is like, this kid is going to like be something. So we need to like protect him.
Gotcha. Okay.
Sends him off into the east, into I think like Turkey.
Gotcha.
And he ends up coming back after Sulla dies.
As one does.
Yes. But so the triumvirate between those three people established in 60 BC. They reign from 60 to 53 BC. Over time, you have Caesar and Pompey. They're both out kind of on campaign, back and forth. Crassus is sort of doing his thing. Somewhat often, he campaigns a lot for a while, but then when he gets older, he ends up back in Rome.
Okay.
Tensions start to grow between the three of them when Crassus dies.
Okay.
And if I'm remembering correctly, all the details, Pompey marries Julius Caesar's sister or daughter.
Yeah, I think I remember something like that.
It's so hard with Roman women because they're all of Julius Caesar's
I think I've heard
daughters and sisters are all named Julia.
There you go.
Because you take the family name if you're a woman, so they're literally all named Julia.
Yeah.
So you're like, I don't know which one is which.
Apparently he's got a lot of sisters and daughters.
Yes.
That's crazy.
So Pompey, they enter into this sort of political marriage. Crassus dies. Pompey breaks that marriage.
Oh, darn.
So everything sort of starts falling apart at that point. Caesar, you mentioned this in the first episode, is in Gaul.
Yep.
commits these sort of like atrocities of like killing, just executing tons of people.
It's genocide.
Genocide.
Yeah.
Right. And then he is charged with crimes and is called back to Rome to be held accountable for those crimes, which there's this whole political interplay because you can't be convicted while you're in the office of consulship. So it's probably why they're calling him back to Rome. So for the longest time, Caesar doesn't come back to Rome.
Strip him of the title. Yeah, the position.
Yep. Sorry.
So real quick, I just want to, before we get any further, because we're about to get to the Rubicon, literally.
Yep.
Why was the triumvirate? Why was it initiated? Because he had the situation with Sulla, his dictator life. He dies. So is this just like the new idea they came up with, or what?
So that's a good question. Again, like this is not like the part of the history that I'm like super, super solid on. But if I remember correctly, sort of the rationale is that it has in part to do with invading peoples from the north.
Okay.
So there's sort of this idea of like what could be considered crisis within the Republic.
And so instead of doing the 2 consuls that would usually defend the Republic, they decide to do 3.
Yeah.
Which honestly, 3 would have been better.
To begin with.
You have a tiebreaker.
Right.
But so they come up with this, and then triumvirate's going on, Crassus dies, Julius Caesar is being called back to Rome to probably strip him of his title and charge him and
imprison
get rid of him
and kill him.
Yeah.
Eventually is what's going to happen, right?
Is Pompey behind that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So Caesar does come back to Rome.
Yeah.
But when you're called back, you're expected to come back by yourself, not with your army.
Wait a second.
Yeah. No, we didn't just you.
Yeah. You've no fair.
Yeah. But so everybody's probably heard of the like saying of crossing the Rubicon.
Yep.
It means like, you're the point of no return.
Yep.
And the Rubicon River is like what signifies some kind of the northern border of Rome as the city-state. Their like borders have obviously expanded. Right. It's like once you cross the Rubicon from the north, you're in like Roman city limits. Is the idea. Caesar shows up with his army, and
it's against the law for an army to march into Rome, right?
Yep.
Right.
Exactly. Bingo. Thank you for saying that, because that's an important detail.
Okay.
But he does not do that. Marches into Rome, initiates civil war.
He does not leave his army behind, right?
No.
Yeah, so he crosses with his army. Okay.
Yes.
I just want to make sure, because the way you said it was like, wait, he did what?
Yeah.
So he marches with his
on
army.
Rome, 49 BC, which starts a civil war between him and Pompey.
Right.
Again, long list of things happen.
Yeah.
Pompey ends up going to Egypt with Cleopatra and tries to build an alliance with her. She ends up siding with Caesar. He defeats Pompey. Caesar returns to Rome, now sort of in this position very much like Sulla, where he has no more political opponents, really. Those he does are like afraid, because they're like, has basically all the support of the military behind him, because Pompey's dead, because Pompey like basically had half the military at his back.
Right.
But there's a key sort of, so we'll get to the Ides of March briefly. Again, we don't have time to go into all this detail, but there's a moment that I want to touch on when, I believe it's when he comes back from defeating Pompey, where he goes to, again, trying to remember all these details, into the Temple of Jupiter. And so again, remember, Caesar is given like the dictatorship for life, the same way Sulla has at this point.
Is it given to him, or does he take it?
It is given to him.
Okay, so that's a little different than Sulla, who tried to claim it first.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So somebody can fact check and make sure that that's whether he was given to him, whether he takes it, or whether it's like it's given to him.
Yeah.
In quote air quotes, like
he's gonna take this, give it to him.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
What's fascinating is there is a distinction, because when you have with Julius Caesar, he has this moment where he like puts on like purple robes and like puts on like the olive branch around his head.
Right.
And he makes this gesture of like, he's already dictator, but he makes this gesture of like royalty.
Right.
And the people actually reject that.
Ah.
And so that's another fascinating kind of interplay at this point where it's like Caesar thinks that he's reached this point of like, I can literally become like a king in Rome, and the people are like, no,
you can't.
You've gone too far.
Yeah.
And that's part of what initiates the whole sort of like, no, we actually have to kill this guy because
he's playing with that dangerous line.
Yes.
Like he's going to do it eventually as soon as he just gets the right amount of support. Because didn't he like start like giving money to the plebeians and like funding them? So he's basically trying to buy them and bribe them to win over some kind of royalty.
Yeah, he's in that same group of, he's called a populares too.
Yeah.
But even more so, like to the nth degree.
Sure.
Turns it up another notch. So because of that, all of this tension, you know, you still have a lot of Pompey's supporters like within the Senate and things like that. There's a conspiracy contrived against Caesar for fear of his power and everything we just mentioned. And the Ides of March is this moment where Caesar's in the Senate and the senators literally start pulling out daggers and stab him to death in the Senate.
And Brutus is an honorable man. It's a quote from, I think, Shakespeare, Julius Caesar, which if you want to watch a really well done segment of that, Charleston Heston, you can find it. He does that excellently. But Brutus is an honorable man is his way of like turning the crowd against the murderers, and I think he plays as Mark Antony in that scene. But
so Caesar dies, full kind of into the triumvirate and everything like that,
which is arguably the nail in the coffin to anything of the Roman Republic, because what happens next is just they end up setting up the Caesar position.
And you know, there's a little bit of sort of back and forth that happens because you have Mark Antony, Octavian Augustus, and then there's another figure, and I can't actually remember who it is off the top of my head, but they form a second triumvirate, and that is sort of born out of this idea of like trying to create some semblance of order after Caesar is killed, because you're like, all of these like major figures that we've had are all gone by this point. Octavian Augustus and Mark Antony end up breaking out into another civil war.
No joke.
They fight each other. Augustus then defeats Mark Antony in Egypt, and then proceeds to literally go around and kills off every single one of his father's political opponents.
Oh, wow.
Anyone who sided with Pompey, anyone who sided with Mark Antony, anybody who belongs to any other camp other than the people who are loyal to Julius Caesar, kills them all.
Cleans house and sets up the empire.
Cleans house. So that is sort of the official point where the Republic is completely dead, although Augustus argues that it's still the Republic and he's still carrying on, like I mentioned, in the traditions of his forefathers. But he ends up getting the title Princeps Senatus, first man of the Senate. That's something that's like not happening. You know, it's like an unprecedented thing. And that's when that's the shift that we see where it becomes an empire, because at this point, the end of the Second Civil War is what it's technically called, because Julius Caesar has civil war with Pompey, and then civil war Octavian and Mark Antony is sort of it's not the end of political violence, because that carries on into the empire, and the emperors keep getting killed and murdered, but it sort of is this like final nail in the coffin of like all of that previous tension is over, because everybody's dead. And
so
here we are.
So for all our listeners, well done. Thank you so much. No, seriously, it was a lot, but it was needed. And I just want to say, like, for all of our listeners, just to think next time you hear somebody say that the founding fathers were trying to build the Roman Republic, no, they weren't. They wanted nothing to do with that mess.
No.
They wanted a free government, a government based on the consent of the people that would protect the God-given rights and liberty of the people.
Yeah.
And they set that up with a system of all these checks and balances to prevent power from centralizing into a body of men and women and or into the hands of a single individual. And that's why modern administrative state, the which sometimes is called the fourth branch of government, would have horrified them because there's no consent given, and all these rules and regulations that have the force of law are put on the people, right? And so you have all these types of things that the system is not what it should be.
Nope.
And so I just wanted to go through a couple of things real quick. Because we're coming down to the end of our time for this third episode. Yeah. But just to think about, and these are just things I just want people to be thinking about and to be concerned with, and when you see them, you need to call them out. Peacefully, call them out constitutionally, call them out of love for neighbor, not out of hate.
Yeah.
Nothing out of hate, but out of love for neighbor. We see the rise of the potential political violence. I mean, seriously, we it's now 2 different assassination attempts on former president. Yeah. Like, that is crazy.
Yeah, so that's what I want to, not to cut you off, but it's just why I think this is important, right? Like, what's the significance of the history of the Roman Republic for us?
Yeah.
And you can see clearly, if I explained it well enough, the escalation from the death of the first Gracchi brother until 2 civil wars.
Yeah, seriously. It seriously is a slippery slope.
And, some people say it's not a valid argument, but it's like, well, no, like, just, fires start with just like one spark of something.
In all honesty, it's a miracle, and it is a grace of God that the political assassinations of Abraham Lincoln and JFK and I can't remember the other guy president because there's another one shot.
Yes.
I can't remember his name. Was it
McKinley? No.
I'm not gonna try. I don't want to be lambasted for that.
Apparently,
one.
It wasn't that important.
Oh, wow. It's a miracle that things didn't unravel then. It's a miracle when Lincoln was shot that a whole nother civil war didn't spark right back up again, right? So it is a grace of God that didn't happen then like it did in Rome. So history doesn't have to repeat itself. Those, like JFK, everybody kind of like came back together and was like, wait a second, we're something more than this.
Yeah.
The same thing with Lincoln, right? And so God forbid any kind of any more political violence whatsoever. Because it can become worse. It can become worse so fast.
100%.
And we're not that. Americans aren't that, because I think one of the defining factors that should emulate us is love for neighbor, right? So that's 100%. One piece that we can see the dangers here. So call it out. Call out political violence. This is not who we are.
Yeah. Well, and then, sorry, just to add on
go
that,
ahead.
It's like, the thought might be we will never devolve into like bludgeoning people in the Senate. And we might not, but
that has already happened. That happened in the early 1800s.
There you go.
A guy literally took his cane and beat the crud out of another guy on the Senate floor.
There you go.
Or the House floor, I think. Yeah. But it has happened.
It has happened. And I think where this is sort of relevant is like, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, like our political rhetoric on both sides of the aisle has gone far past what is acceptable decorum.
Oh, for sure.
And, it's like sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But it's like, but
words
hurt. Have power.
Words can spark a fire.
Yeah. And
for sure.
I don't want to get on this point, and I've already had a soapbox in the last episode, so I don't get to. But I think there's a genuine warning of you can look at the history of ancient Rome, and regardless of whether you would consider yourself more aligned with the optimates or the populares party, the end result of political violence prescription list is evil regardless of who supposedly is doing it and in what name they're doing it.
Right. No matter, and just to agree with you, no matter which side of the spectrum you're on, political violence is not your friend.
Right.
It doesn't solve your problems.
Right.
It only makes them worse.
It makes it way worse.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's evil. Call it out for what it is.
Yeah.
So that, and then just some of the other things that we need to be cautious about and be calling out. The ideological divisions on the culture and political landscape right now. We've talked about it many times. It's part of what we're trying to do with this podcast is to make sure we're defining things from a biblical perspective, from truth. Because part of the issue, the ideological differences right now, is both people are yelling the same words with completely different meanings. And it's literally the fragmentation is scary.
Yeah, it is.
But that was what we were talking about. I think it was in this episode, maybe it was the last episode, where we can have actual real conversations with each other because we can respect each other as made in the image of God. Yes, I disagree with you, but I love you and I'm going to respect you. And yeah, I'm going to probably vote different than you because I believe a certain way, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. And here's the thing is to love someone doesn't mean I affirm their beliefs and their ideas.
Right.
But I can still respect them and love them as made in the image of God. And I think that we've got to get back to that. That way, that'll help fix some of the fissures that have broken out and all the tremblings of our ideological divisions today, because there are certain things I will never and can never agree with or affirm. But I still want the best for those people and still want them to come to what I believe to be the truth.
Sure.
And so just going on from there, here's something you didn't really touch on, but it is just as true. The bread and circuses of the Roman government trying to keep the populace calm and from paying attention and from getting rid of the tyranny. Just entertain them and feed them welfare and entertain them.
Yeah.
We are probably the most entertained civilization in history.
Yeah. 100%.
At the tip of your fingers any second, and I'm guilty of it. I find myself, dude, and this is terrible. Sometimes I play video games, we've talked about that.
That's not terrible.
No, that's not. What's terrible is if there's a moment of pause in the game for whatever reason, loading something, I find myself reaching for my phone to check. And it's dude, can you not be unentertained for 2 seconds?
Yeah. I stress my wife out sometimes because I'll be playing a game on my phone and have a video about the game playing also on my phone at the same time.
Oh my gosh.
And
wow.
Yeah. And it's perfectly, it's sometimes I'm it overstimulates me.
Yeah.
But it's we have this sort of thing that for whatever reason has been baked into us, that we have the constant input of entertainment, constant distraction,
it's
constant
that dopamine rush and hit. Search that we're trying to get, right? And
exactly.
So just that, the warning for all of us, you and me, is pay attention and be willing to call evil out when it's evil, and to stand for truth and love your neighbor.
Yeah.
And but don't get so entertained that you can't see what would be oppressive and tyrannical. Even if it never touches you, maybe it's touching somebody else, but you need to love that person enough to call it out for them. Right. And so don't get sucked into whether it's a conspiracy that they're doing it on purpose, or if it's just the system that we have set up for ourselves, whatever. Don't get don't get sucked into the bread and circuses.
Yep.
And so this is another point. Don't want to spend too much time on this, but part of the fall of the Roman Republic that became the empire, and then the empire ended up falling. This is one of the main key pieces of it, was the Rome's economy. They devalued their currency for their debts and such, for their welfare programs. So that, and how they would do it is they would take their coinage and they would melt it down and then make smaller coins. And then they would do another thing they would do is melt it down and then mix different alloys with the gold and silver. Yeah. And so it became worthless because there were so many of them.
We've been doing that for a long time with our coins. But
inflation. Yeah. We've been doing it with our coins, but it caused inflation. Yeah. We've done the same thing in the U.S. with our dollar. Our economy, our monetary system, our currency isn't backed by anything. It's fiat. They can do as much as they want, print as much as they want, and Rome fell. This is part of the piece that caused Rome as an empire to fall, was the devaluing of the currency. And so that's something else to pay attention to and be on alert for.
For sure.
And the last thing, we've kind of I already mentioned this earlier, is it's the centralization of power in the federal government, because the Constitution limits the federal government to 18 things it's allowed to do in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Most of what it does is outside that, especially in the administrative state. It is well over 100. It might be close to 200 different administrative agencies that have the power to make rules and regulations that have the force of law that you would show up to be judged by if you broke and fined. I don't know if they can imprison. They might even have that power. I'd have to check it. Fined for sure for breaking these rules that you never had given consent to, and that your representatives gave up their legislative power to these agencies, so you don't even have consent through your representatives on these different laws that are passing. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's something that needs its own episodes. It's the administrative state. It is the antithesis. That's the word. It's the antithesis of liberty and government by consent of the governed. It's unjust. A slogan I like to think about, no regulation without representation.
Like so take that, FDA.
Yeah, right. No, yeah. So, all that to say, all these things, we've seen the Roman Republic. We saw its structures. The founding fathers didn't want that. They wanted ideas. They took some seeds of ideas. They took some terms and those kind of influences. But the biggest influences that the founders got from the Roman Republic was, we don't want to be that way. So they created a better system. Yep. Based more in truth, based more in biblical principles, especially biblical principles about human nature. Set up all those checks and balances, the system that would help balance itself out. And in that, we saw how Rome fell. We see where we're at. We don't have to be that. We can repent, we can forgive, we can love our neighbors even if we disagree with them and don't affirm where they are. We can respect them because they're made in the image of God, and we can stand up for their God-given rights and liberty, not any rights and liberty that we want to make up, but we can stand up for each other's fundamental God-given rights and liberty, and we should. And that can start fixing some of these things. Yeah. So, for sure. I would say those are my closing thoughts. Kind of a summation of everything we've been talking about in these last 3 episodes. Any thoughts from you?
I mean, at first I just want to say thanks for just the opportunity to nerd out on some Roman history. It was a blast. Thanks to everybody who listens and suffers through the super dense episodes that we just did, because they're very dense historically. Yeah, it's a good stuff, though. It's a lot of history in a little amount of time. Yeah. And, what is that, like 800 years of history? Yeah, like 800 years of history. Normally, you would get all of that in like a semester. Yeah. So, yeah. Well done breaking it down. 3 hours. That's all it was. Yep. Good job. But so, yeah. So I just want to say thanks for that. And then just to say, like, I don't know, I think I kind of touched on it already, but I feel like as someone who studies ancient history, I think we can, venerate ancient societies. Yep. a bit too much. And I think to understand that they are run by sinful people and sinful people who lived in those societies and did sinful things, and who needed the grace of God and his favor as much as we do today.
Yeah, for sure.
And then just sort of lastly, that I think there are lessons that you can learn from history.
Yes, absolutely.
And while I believe that God's providence, it guides all things, and ultimately he has ultimate authority to allow things and to allow or not allow movements, and he's in charge, as we're about to read this verse, of whoever's on the throne.
Yeah.
But there's also this relationship with our personal responsibility. And if you look at the history of the Roman Republic, the development of something like the political violence, you could say like, well, when it happens with the Gracchus, it was inevitable that all of those things would follow after that.
Yeah.
And while it may have set a precedent, I don't think that it's fair to say that it was inevitable.
Right.
Because if the senators themselves had chosen and had the, self-control and, conscience of mind to say, wait a second, that was wrong. You know what I mean? Like, we need to repent, literally turn the other way and move away from that. The history of the Roman Republic could have looked a lot different.
Yeah.
And so my fear is that we would have a similar, maybe fatalist attitude about our own modern
or deterministic,
determinist, right? Of like, the deal's already been sealed. We've opened up too many can of worms that we can't close.
Yeah.
And I just don't really believe that to be true, at least not in our own personal lives.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, we have a responsibility to, like, regardless of what's happening in our own political, cultural landscape, to be like, no, but what am I called to do as an individual? And how am I going to choose to live an upright life regardless of what those circumstances are?
Right.
If anything, I think the history of Rome teaches us that. And so, that's my final soapbox.
Well, I appreciate it, man.
Today.
No, like, just all that, like, God's common grace, he causes his rain to fall on the just and the unjust, right? And so the good things, we can point out good things in the Roman Republic. Some of those systems, like I said, they were seeds of good ideas, and they caused some human flourishing for a while. Ended up not working ultimately, and I think ultimately it's because it's not founded in ultimate truth. But even societies that were founded in ultimate truth, apart from God's grace, they don't even make it. And so it is not God's will and plan for the universe. What is determined is that Christ will come back and he will make all things new and restore all things. And that's our hope.
Amen.
Everything in between now and then, he didn't tell us. He is in charge, and we have agency to go do. So we don't have to repeat the mistakes of the past. We can do better by the grace of God. And we should seek that grace of God for ourselves, for our communities, for our churches, for our families, and for our country. Right? And that's what I hope and pray for this country and all the chaos that we're in, is that we turn to the Lord, we seek his grace, and we love him and we love one another, and we would start standing up for the liberty and rights that God has given us for our neighbors. Yeah. Amen.
Cool. Do you want to read this verse real quick?
I do. So this is something we did in 3 episodes ago now, which is 3 hours ago for us, but you're probably getting it 3 weeks apart for our listeners. But in part, this is what this verse says. O Lord God of our fathers, are you not God in heaven? You rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. In your hand are power and might, so that none is able to withstand you. 2 Chronicles 20, verse 6. So just leave that with you guys. Know that he's in charge, he's in control, he's good, he's very gracious, and he's so gracious to the humble. So humble, we need to be humble, repent, turn to him, follow his way. So thank you again for everything you said. I love everything. I've learned so much. Like, really, I have learned so much in these last 3 hours and I hope it's been a blessing to you to be able to share, but also to our listeners. And thanks for listening, guys.
For sure. Thank y'all. Thanks, Joel.
God bless, guys. Thank you for listening to the Free Man's Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe for more great episodes coming your way soon. For more information and to sign up for exclusive bonus content, you can visit our website, thefreemanspodcast.com. Thanks again for listening, and God bless y'all.